The letter arrived on the morning of my daughter's second wedding. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my housecoat, holding a mug of tea that had gone lukewarm, when I heard the mail slot click. I didn't move right away. I just sat there, watching the light come through the curtains the way it does in late September in Ontario. That thin, pale gold that doesn't quite warm anything. I wasn't supposed to be involved anymore. That had been the whole point. 14 months earlier, my son-in-law had signed an agreement, a legal document prepared by a lawyer in Mississauga, witnessed and notarized, that said in plain language that he would make no claim on my daughter, no claim on her assets, and no claim on the child she was carrying. In exchange, my wife and I had written him a check for $240,000, our savings, our retirement fund, the money we'd put away over 31 years of working and not spending and telling each other someday. He took the check, he signed the papers, he left. That was supposed to be the end of it. I need to back up a little, because this doesn't make sense without the beginning. My daughter, she was 34 when all of this started, had been married to this man for 6 years. I'll call him my former son-in-law, because I don't know what else to call him now. He was from Sudbury originally, came down to the GTA for work, met my daughter through mutual friends at some backyard thing in Etobicoke. My wife liked him. I tolerated him. He was the kind of man who had opinions about everything, and was wrong about half of it. But he wasn't cruel, and he seemed to love her in his way. The marriage started going sideways around year 4. I didn't see it at first. My daughter is private, she gets that from me. And she doesn't ask for help until she absolutely has to. But eventually she told us. She told us that they had grown apart, that the house felt like a waiting room, that she was lonely in a way she couldn't explain. What she didn't tell us, not then, was that she had started something with her supervisor at work. A man 15 years older than her, divorced himself, no children. He ran a mid-sized property management company out of Burlington, and had money in the way that some people have money. Not flashy, just permanently comfortable. Good shoes. Paid for things without looking at the bill. She told us about him after she found out she was pregnant. That conversation happened in our living room on a Sunday afternoon in July. My wife cried. I didn't. I sat in the armchair by the window, and I listened to my daughter explain that the pregnancy was not her husband's, that they hadn't been intimate in months, and that the father was this man from Burlington, and that she wanted a divorce, and that she wanted to move forward with her life. I asked her one question. I said, "Does your husband know?" She said, "Not yet." The next few weeks were the ugliest of my life. My former son-in-law did not take the news quietly. There were lawyers involved almost immediately. He made noise about contesting everything. He said things about my daughter that I will not repeat. He contacted her at work. He drove past the house. That's when my daughter's lawyer suggested the settlement. A private agreement outside of standard proceedings to accelerate the separation. The number that came back from his side was $250,000. My wife and I talked about it for one night. We didn't debate it long. Our daughter was 3 months pregnant and frightened, and we had the money. We called our financial advisor the next morning. We liquidated most of what we had outside the house. The RSPs we'd planned to draw down slowly, some bonds, a small investment account my wife had inherited from her mother. We came up with $240,000. His lawyer accepted. He signed. He left. We thought it was over. My daughter moved in with her partner from Burlington. They planned to marry quietly. A small ceremony, just family and a few friends at a venue outside Hamilton. She was 7 months along by then. They'd done a prenatal paternity confirmation at a clinic in Oakville. Standard procedure her OB recommended, just to have everything documented. We didn't think anything of it. And then the morning of the wedding, that letter came through the slot. I picked it up off the floor. It was addressed to my daughter but sent to our house. She'd used our address for some things during the separation period and apparently hadn't updated everything. The return address was from a medical laboratory in Mississauga. I knew what it was before I opened it. I don't know how. Some part of me recognized the weight of it. I called my daughter. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I tried her partner's number, and he picked up on the third ring. And I could hear people in the background, women's voices, someone laughing, the particular bustle of a morning that's supposed to be happy. I told him he needed to call me back privately. Right away. He called back 7 minutes later, from what sounded like a quiet hallway. I read him what was in the letter. I didn't editorialize, I just read the relevant line. The results indicated that the named individual was not the biological father of the fetus. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's not possible." I said, "That's what it says." He said he needed to talk to my daughter. I sat back down at the kitchen table. My wife came downstairs and I showed her the letter, and she sat down too, and we just looked at each other. We'd given up our retirement savings so that our daughter could start a new life with a man who, according to this document, was not the father of her child, which raised the question that neither of us said out loud for almost an hour. If he wasn't the father, and her husband wasn't the father, then who was? My daughter called me back at 11:47 in the morning. The ceremony was scheduled for 1 o'clock. She was crying, but not the way you cry when you're devastated. More the way you cry when something has been discovered that you were hoping would stay hidden. She told me there had been someone else. A brief thing, she said. A few months before she ended things with her husband, overlapping slightly with the beginning of what became the relationship with her partner. A man she'd met through a professional development event in Toronto. She didn't give me a name. She said she'd ended it quickly, that it hadn't meant anything, that she'd told herself the timing made the paternity question straightforward. She had told herself wrong. I am 63 years old. I have worked, I have paid my taxes, I have shown up. I coached youth hockey for 9 years. I shoveled my neighbor's driveway every winter for a decade because he had bad knees. I am not a man who raises his voice easily or says things he can't take back. But sitting at that table, I felt something I don't have a clean word for. Not anger exactly. Something more like vertigo. Like the ground had moved. I said, "What do you need from me right now?" She said she didn't know. I said, "Is the wedding happening?" She said she didn't know that either. What happened next, I only know in pieces because I wasn't there. My wife drove to the venue. I stayed home because my daughter asked me to. My son-in-law, I'll keep calling him that, because they did eventually go through with it, 2 hours late, in a room full of people who had no idea what had happened that morning. My son-in-law had a conversation with my daughter in a coat room off the main hall. My wife stood outside the door. She didn't hear everything, but she heard enough. He told my daughter that it didn't change how he felt, that whatever the biology was, the child was going to be raised as his. And he wanted that, and he was asking her to be honest with him about everything going forward. That was his condition, complete honesty, from that moment. My daughter agreed. They got married now. Here is the part where I become involved again, against my own better judgment, and against the very clear terms of the agreement we'd signed. 3 weeks after the wedding, my former son-in-law retained a new lawyer. Not about the divorce, that was settled, but about the settlement agreement itself. His argument was that he had signed under false pretenses, that the pregnancy had been represented to him as definitively not his, and that this had been a material factor in his agreement to the terms. His lawyer sent a letter to our family's lawyer, suggesting the agreement might be voidable, and requesting the return of the $240,000. I want to be precise here. The agreement said nothing about paternity. It said he was making no claim on the child. It didn't say whose child it was. Our lawyer reviewed it and told us we were likely on solid ground. But likely is not certainly, and the idea of litigation at my age, with the money already spent on the settlement itself and on helping my daughter with a down payment, the idea of that kept me up at night. I called my former son-in-law directly. I had his number still. He picked up. I said, "What is it you actually want?" He said he wanted to know the truth. He said the 240,000 wasn't really the point. He said he had told people, his family, his friends, that the baby wasn't his. He'd built a story around it. And now he'd heard through someone, I don't know how, that the paternity question was more complicated than that. He said he felt like he'd been made to look foolish. I said, "You were paid a significant amount of money to walk away. You walked away. That part doesn't change," he said. "I know." Then he said something I've thought about many times since. He said, "I just needed someone to acknowledge it. That's all, that it was a mess, and that I got caught in the middle of something I didn't make." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "You're right, it was a mess, and you didn't make it, and I'm sorry that we couldn't have handled it differently." He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Okay." Then he said he'd tell his lawyer to stand down. That was 4 months ago. My granddaughter was born on a Tuesday, in late November, in a hospital in Hamilton. 6 pounds, 4 ounces. They named her something that I won't share because that's theirs to share. I was in the waiting room with my wife when she arrived. My son-in-law came out first, and he shook my hand and his eyes were red. He loves that little girl. Whatever the biology is, whatever the paperwork says, whatever the letter through the mail slot said on the morning of his wedding, he loves her. My daughter and I have talked about the rest of it, slowly, over the past few months. Not in one conversation. In pieces, the way things actually get processed between people who don't do feelings easily. She told me she was sorry. I told her I didn't need her to be sorry. I told her I needed her to be honest with her husband and with herself, and she said she was working on it. The man who is biologically my granddaughter's father. My daughter contacted him after everything came out. He was not interested in any claim. He signed something to that effect without any significant discussion. That particular door closed quietly. The $240,000 is gone. We'll be working a few years longer than we planned. My wife has taken it better than I have, honestly. She says the money bought us clarity and closure, and that clarity and closure are worth something. I think she's right. I'm still getting there. I don't tell this story because it ends well, exactly. It ends, and that's something. My daughter is in a stable marriage with a man who chose her and chose her daughter with his eyes open. My granddaughter is healthy and loud and already has opinions about things. The legal situation resolved without any of us having to sit across from each other in a courtroom. But there are things I'll carry. The feeling of writing that check. The silence on the phone. When I read that letter to a man who thought he was about to get married and suddenly didn't know anything for certain. The conversation in the kitchen at 63 years old, realizing that being a parent doesn't have an end date, that the things your children are in the middle of become the things you are in the middle of, whether you signed any papers or not. I keep coming back to what my former son-in-law said, that he just needed someone to acknowledge it. I think most people in most situations aren't asking for that much. They're not asking for money returned or apologies performed or wrongs undone. They're asking for someone to look them in the eye and say, "Yes, this happened, and it was hard, and you were here." That's the thing I keep thinking about. I deleted the photos I'd taken of that letter before I read it to him. I don't need to have them. I remember what it said. I remember all of it.